You are probably all wondering why an American is up here. I actually grew up in Albury, so I lived there from 1966 to 71. So I'm not totally not Australian. My sister has a ranch there still, and obviously the Mars business is well known in Australia. And also, what you're going to see was developed by an Aussie in Indonesia. So think about that when you see this, because it actually is very relevant. And I'm going to explain and hopefully answer in the next 20 minutes all the questions that are going through your mind as to why is a company like Mars Incorporated interested in coral restoration. So basically, you know us for our brands. How many brands do you have in your pantry that are from Mars Incorporated? Right? That's a lot. And actually, we now are the largest veterinary business in the world. We employ a huge number of veterinarians. We actually hire now a third of the graduating veterinarians in the United States and operate 2,500 hospitals. But as it relates to Australia, I will come back to, we're an ag company. In the end, we source raw materials. And last year, we decided as a private business to, regardless of what our commander-in-chief has decided with the Paris Accord, that the business would continue to respect the Paris Accord. And we were going to take a crack at changing how we do business. So we're using 1.5 planets. Jason Clay from WWF is very, very adamant about tracking how much we're using as a planet worldwide. Not Mars, but the world. That's not sustainable. And to understand sustainability, you have to start thinking, okay, is this going to be available for my children? Is this going to be available for my grandchildren? And if you look at businesses around the world, we have to try and figure out how to be sustainable going forward, which means we have to change how we do business completely. Our carbon footprint is the same size as the country of Panama. So we have an impact on the world. And most of that comes through agriculture from what we buy. Our operations are quite small from a greenhouse gas perspective. Just recently, I believe down here, we just announced by 2020 we'll have all our operations in Australia powered by solar. In the United States, we're already running on wind, as we are in the UK as well. And so we announced this plan to literally invest back into these 3 areas. The key part of it, obviously, healthy planet. You can't have a healthy planet. It's a non-starter. You have to have a healthy planet. The thriving people is the more challenging one worldwide, and that's where we're putting a lot of effort. I'm putting a lot of effort personally in that, and that's why this is somewhat connected. And then changing the products that we make, increasingly figuring out how to make them conducive to the future of the types of things that people want to eat. You saw 2 students earlier. I want you to think about when you go shopping and watch your kids go shopping. So when we went shopping, I have gray hair. I can tell you I never looked at the ingredient deck. I can tell you that if you have kids and teenagers, they actually turn the packages around and look at what's in the ingredient deck. And blockchain, for those of you who know what blockchain is, going to become standard practice for actually most raw material streams in the future. Consumers want to know where their ingredients are coming from, and companies are going to have to know where they're coming from. So I come back to this and say, why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because there's brands here that use materials, hopefully some of these are in your pantry, that come from the Coral Triangle. And why is the Coral Triangle? This is why Mars cares about coral restoration. All right, so fundamentally, everybody knows the importance of the Coral Triangle. Indonesia is the heart of it. I've actually run that country for a number of years as part of my global responsibilities. I stepped out of running a P&L last year. And I know the country well. And so out of that developed our marine program. And it was basically around the premise that those brands that I showed you, those raw materials, protein is the primary source, fish protein is their primary source. And in the 20 years I've been going to Indonesia, the protein that the farmers and the families and the fishermen have been eating has been getting smaller and smaller. That's not sustainable. Now there's a bunch of reasons for why, and you can't just blame climate change on that. So today, among my other board responsibilities and everything else, I actually have a very small team, and this is what I'm focusing on, which is basically looking at integrated pest management, or how you want to look at ecosystem. How do you actually get the best out of looking at everything versus trying to come up with one solution to something, and going back to basics. Because we've fed the world on the basis of chemicals and fertilizers, and we've actually destroyed the ecosystems that are out there. The green revolution has to change. It also has massive implications, obviously, for the water. Now, I shouldn't be up here doing this. Susan Williams should be up here doing this. I don't know how many of you know Susan Williams or knew Susan Williams. She passed tragically in a car crash on her way to teach her class at UC Davis, Bodega Bay, in April. And what you're about to see has been, in part, her legacy. She will be greatly missed by me. Because she was a great challenger from a science perspective. We had an R&D program, an idea around coral restoration, and she increasingly pushed us to add more science to it, which you will see. So, what are we doing? These are our collaborators. ACAR has been a great partner. We've had some good support at JCU as well. We've been working on 2 islands. We're actually on 3 locations now. I'll show you all 3. Pool of Bodies, where we started, and you can see the green. That's where we've restored. It's about 2.5 hectares of material. We actually started, this is the marine protected area over here, in theory. You want to talk about it, but, and the docks over there. We actually started over there where there were no fish. And actually, we should have started over here. So learning on this for us. Everybody's been talking about coral restoration. Coral restoration is irrelevant. It's called about fish. And eating algae is what this is all. The game is all about. You can go and make the greatest coral in the world, but if you do not have herbivorous fish to actually eat the algae that wants to settle on the reef, forget about it. It's a non-starter. So remember that. The Indonesian challenge is very different to here, albeit obviously I did see some of this last year when I was out on the reef here. You know, cyanide fishing and bomb fishing is not conducive to healthy reefs. And a lot of Indonesian reef areas look like that. That is very, very difficult to bring back. And from a starting perspective, how do you go about it? So we basically adapted what the Maldives started with. So we looked at various things. We tried all sorts of technologies back in 2011 and finally developed this in 2012. And we've modified it since then. We call it the coral spider. It's technically not a spider for those of you who are zoologists, because it only has 6 legs. It does not have 8 legs. Or is it the other way around? No, that's, yeah. And we call it a spider because we tie them together in a giant web. And then we actually stake down the leading edges for where there's current. We've increasingly figured out how to do this faster. In fact, this week is a build. So tomorrow, the team that is doing this, we do 6 to 8 builds a year on this second island, the Bantasu Island. It involves about 7,000 fragments and 500 plus spiders in the course of 3 days in a space about 3 times the size of this room, more or less, about a basketball court. And a small team builds that every month, for 6 to 8 months a year. The process is pretty simple. We have one island that actually makes up the spiders, so it's all locally made by the islanders, different islands. They stack, so you can make them in advance. I can explain to everybody how we do it later if you'd like. We've trained the local islanders around the island we're working on to take fragments which are collected the day before. They start making those spiders up. We then take them out to their reef location Divers bring them down, tie them together. You have a master builder. It's like putting a puzzle underwater. You can only have 1 or 2 people building the puzzle because you have to meet up. You can only make it a certain size. You can see the importance of the fish. There are some fish that are really, really good. I can tell you that a new innovation that was desperately needed from this community is a dusky damselfish spear gun. Because big spear guns are kind of hard to hit with the fish that's this small, and the fish that, like the farm algae, are a problem. When you're jump starting the ecosystem of a reef that's dead, that's controlled by fish that want to farm algae, you've got to figure out how to actually manage that particular issue. And in the end, you can see it starts to grow. So this video will show you 2 builds, 2 different builds. Listen and watch. You can get a feel for how the system works. And one was in 2014 where we went too big. So you can't actually build a space this big because the fish that control the algae won't swim that far. You have to kind of work around and do stuff. And then the second video is one that shows after 2 years of the build. And also after a major storm in the spring, so about 14 months into that rebuild, massive 5-meter waves totally mashed it up, and it grew back. So what you'll see is the grow back piece of it. And hopefully the sound will work. See, you can build around the existing reef flats, and this is on the reef flat. We are doing other builds at deeper levels, but basically here we've been working on the reef flats, about 3 meters. When you can only hear the diver breathing, that's a problem. The reef is not alive. See some fish, but not very much. Switch in a second. This is pretty typical of most Indonesian reefs. See that stake there? That's what we use to anchor down the feeding edges, or for markers, but usually for current. Been no special selection of fragments, so when you start to think about the possibilities of adding in better genetics or better selection of species and a different range of species. As we've done new builds, we've tried to do more diversity in terms of types of corals. But effectively, we're rebuilding the reef flat. So this is we've been actually, obviously Susan's been she was monitoring this and had different transects that she was looking at. So scientifically, this is true, and this is actually in a paper that's been submitted. And we're seeing this pretty consistently. You'll see another build that we're doing which shows the same, actually faster growth at a deeper depth. Now you ask about temperature. This is the temperature we recorded July. So for a year through May 2016, and you can see a lot of this reef flat coral actually gets out, and this shallow stuff actually gets into the air during the day. So the coral that we've been working with It's already adapted, so this comes back to the comment about the Red Sea relative to stuff. So, I mean, that's a last resort type thing. I don't think, at some point in time it may have to be looked at. But the coral there is clearly adapted to it. What was interesting was the deeper coral had the bigger issue. We saw the deeper coral have more issues than the reef flat coral. So we're working on a second island. We call this our Pure Science Island because we actually baseline this for an entire year with the University of Assisted and a whole bunch of other people. This has been completely, the entire island's been baseline. You talk about the coral, the fish, you name it, we did everything that was asked. We didn't do a sound baseline, that was about the only thing we didn't do. We looked at the coral, we agreed where, you'll see we've agreed what we're going to do where. We also did, this comes back to Bose, what you were talking about, we actually did, the Dr. Carter guys did wave modeling on this for us, and this is pretty cool. So this assumes a 1 meter reef crest increase, and you can clearly see the impact. And actually, we actually modified the build because they have some breakwaters that they put in earlier or closer to the island. This island used to be actually shown, when we get back to the picture of the island, I'll show you how big it used to be. So we actually have control areas that we're not going to do anything. We've got two undamaged control areas and one damaged control area. This was a big debate between Susan and I because if this was my island beach resort, I would have fixed this damage control area first. I wanted this is where I would have started because you then would have made a really strong area. I lost that battle. Industry doesn't always win against the scientists, just to let you know. But we've got very clear rules. After 3 months, we can't touch it. So after we do a build, there's some maintenance things you can do for the first 3 months, and then after 3 months, that's it. It's hands off for 4 years. So this is a four-year endeavor. The island, if you look at the picture of this island, you see that tree to the right. That used to be at the center of the island 10 years ago. That's how much the island is lost. And they did it to themselves to some degree because they actually mined the coral. They found, a lot of different things that they did to the island to make it worse. And what you see there is the design for where we're going to build. The Salisi is actually the nursery. We added this build off here to the far right to deal with that breakwater on the far right of the island. Basically, the modeling said build that up there, you can remove that breakwater. So, a lot of effort's gone into this. And I'm going to be spending the next week and a half here in Australia and visiting Ames and JCU to talk about how we could actually get more people engaged with this. Now, I apologize in advance. So some of these pictures came offline, off the web, because when you type in coral restoration, these are the types of things that come up. And you talked about when we looked at this, we said, okay, this has to be practical, this has to be scalable, this has to be affordable. So it comes back to that slide we saw earlier. Planting corals and gluing corals underwater is not scalable. This is not an option from the standpoint of rebuilding anything. And the other thing, when you actually look at lots of pictures online, how many people that you need to actually go and plant, as well as how many pictures you find online of divers who are really engaged in this and you see them scrubbing algae off of things. That's the fish's responsibility. We don't need divers scrubbing algae off stuff. If we can't design a system that actually the fish manage the algae, then it's not scalable. So, saying this, obviously I don't need to tell you, but Houston, we have a problem. This is a serious issue. You think about the responsibility of governance from a Marine Park Authority perspective and the future of finding that balance between what do you do now and what do you do for the future. If you don't have a park, you don't need an authority, right? So if it's all red, they failed, we failed. Hopefully I'll be allowed to come back in the country. You have to put in a visa now, so it's a little challenging. Anyway, so I have a different perspective. This is my personal perspective, which is we've got enough knowledge out there now. You know, it was 10,000, 11,000 papers on coral. There's some really cool stuff that's come out recently. Right? If you actually look at the papers that are coming out in terms of sight, sound, smell, our knowledge of how the reef ecosystem works, and to say that we need to keep doing research. Well, okay, yeah, that's great. We need to publish papers so we can get jobs and everything else, but we've got enough knowledge to actually start rebuilding reefs. And if you think about the economics of the importance of this area and why people come because they want to go snorkel and dive. They want to have a great time. They want to see fish. They want to see coral. Right? They want to stay there on the Great Barrier Reef. It's 2,600 kilometers long. Right? Sharon made the comment about, there's very few places to go. There's 11 pontoons out there. You add in the number of boats that go out every day with massive amounts of people on it and the islands. What is the total hectares that people are in the water on the Great Barrier Reef every day? 5, 10, 50, I'll give you 50, right? It's no more than that, right? You've got a huge economy here based on 50 hectares of water, not the Great Barrier Reef. Yes, they come and take a helicopter and do it on Saturday, take a helicopter ride, see the Great Barrier Reef. But the reality is the economics of why people are coming and the experience, they want to go and take pictures and Instagram and WhatsApp and rate their experience is based on less than 50 hectares of water. Fix it. Now, I told you I grew up Australian, right? So I'm not going to pull any punches here. Right? Now, you're going to say, well, it can't be done. And I'm going to show you that it can be done. So if you consider 1 hectare area of a semi-damaged reef, and you do a build every month for half the year, and let's say we increase the EMC for $5 for all international visitors to the reef. Costs $20 to go to the Taj Mahal, World Heritage Site. Costs $20 to go to Angkor Wat, another World Heritage Site. Costs $7 to go out on the reef, a World Heritage Site. It's $32 for a car to get into Yellowstone, another World Heritage Site. You are undervaluing the World Heritage Site from the standpoint of the fee that's being charged, and that money should actually be then focused on coral restoration. That's where the money can come from. So what can I do with $5 million a year? All right, so it costs, our methodology costs in Indonesia about $250,000 per hectare in terms of the numbers of spiders on an average amount of degraded reef. We don't use unless you're doing 100%. Let's say it's double the cost here because you've got all sorts of regulations and other things we have to deal with. And it's $500,000 to rebuild it. So basically, in 1 pontoon could rebuild 1 hectare every 2 years. It can be paid for by increasing the EMC. And you can then move the pontoon to another location if you wanted to, relative to stuff. But you could actually engage consumers. Now you're probably going to say, no, this will never happen. Well, guess what? We're doing it right now with Bali High Cruises in Bali. And that's the picture you see at the top left. That's recent from this week. They've actually now started to engage consumers. The consumers that come out there want to actually build the spiders, tie the fragments on, the Bali High divers that take them down. Actually, you're now fully trained. This is an experiment we've been doing for 9 months with them. It's a much deeper location. Again, 100,000 plus visitors to that one thing, and that's just for them. There's other people that come into this bay. It's a very overstressed location. That's what the reef looks like at the bottom. This is what it looks like now after 9 months. So we're actually seeing faster growth rates because of the water welling that's coming in through the Indian Ocean there in terms of the depth. It's at 7 meters. So I'm very encouraged by this. They're very encouraged by this because they actually have aquanauts, and what they're going to do with the spiders is they're actually going to create a pathway that people can walk through, deliberately walk through the coral reef and see it, because that's part of the attraction that they have for people to experience. You couldn't do that with a natural reef. You can actually recreate a reef here by doing it. So we're now starting to play with different sizes, different heights. The spiders are designed, we can modify the spider design. Think about this. Rebuilding, some of it, people will keep coming. Now, I'd like to thank my team. This is my marine team, 2 Australians, an Indonesian, and a Dutchman. The guy in the center, you can't see, that's Noel Janetsky. He's the one that actually came up with this idea over time. The first time I saw it, I thought he was nuts, but that's all right. It's evolved. And Alicia McCarl, who's there on the far left, she actually lives here in Cairns. She just joined the team a couple months ago. She's actually doing the build this week. So we'll have a connection to this environment here relative to stuff and being able to move things forward. But thank you for listening.